Chevra, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Rosh Chodesh today is Erev Shabbos Parsha Shoftim. We're in the month of Elul, the month of soul searching and preparing ourselves for the new year. Today we're going to speak about an amazing mitzvah, but case study of the Torah, which offers a tremendous contrast between our way of life, Torah law, and secular law. The contrast is immense. But before we start, we'll start as usual with a prayer. And we're saying Kapitel Chav Zayin these days of Tehillim, so we'll start with the first verse. L'David Adinoi Oidi V'Yishi Mimi Iro Adinoi Mois Chayai Mimi Evchod. This is one of my favorite verses, and it was composed by David, and he says, Hashem Oidi V'Yishi, Hashem is my light and my salvation. Mimi Iro, who should I fear? And then he says, Hashem Mois Chayai, Hashem is my strength, the strength of my vitality. So one interpretation here is, and this is what I always stress, the first thing is Hashem Oiri. Hashem has to be my guiding light. The Torah, the wisdom of God, that is the light. That is light, means understanding. Like we say, Ezeu Chacham, who is wise, Haroya Esanelid. Who is wise? The one who sees the future. In other words, he has sight, he has foresight. That's wisdom. So when we say Hashem Oiri, that means my wisdom is God, the Torah. That is my wisdom. That's the one who defines my values and my principles, etc. And this is the first thing. First we have to know what's right and what's wrong. Hashem Oiri. And then V'Yishi, then you can be helped and to know what is the right thing and what's wrong, etc., etc. So too we'll see today in our Parsha. At the end of Parsha Shoftim, it speaks about something fascinating, and it's very great relevance to our times. Right now, in America, there's much discussion about guns and violence and crime and defunding the police, etc. And maybe we could say that from this week's Parsha we could learn how to eradicate murder completely. How to completely eradicate murder. Now, it's never going to be completely, because people have choices. Some people make their own choices. But I reckon that if society would follow what the prescribed in this week's Parsha to do in a case of an unsolved murder, obviously it would bring down crime by an unbelievable percentage. What does the Torah tell us? The Parsha ends off with an unsolved murder. And we're going to read the words of the Parsha because the words themselves are so powerful. And not like usual, where I usually say over a Sikha from the Rebbe, today at the end we'll speak the moral from a Sikha of the Rebbe. But before that, just the words of the Torah itself are so profound that we should spend time just thinking about it, digesting it, absorbing it, internalizing it. The Torah tells us, Ki motzi chol ba'adama, if you find a body on the ground, Noifel basadi, fell in the field, and we don't know who committed this murder. And then the pasuk says, first let's just go quickly what the pasukim say here, and then we'll go back slowly to pay attention. And it says, the elders should go out, your judges should go out, they have to measure which city is closest to where the body was found. And the city which is closest then has to take the elders of that city, and they have to bring a certain, we'll call it a sacrifice for lack of a better word. It's not really a sacrifice. I'm not going to get into the whole egla right now, what happens to the calf. That's a separate shear, a separate lesson. Okay? They have to then bring up a calf, and they have to go through a whole ritual, and then the kohanim have to come out, and they have to make a blessing. And then after we go through this whole ritual with the calf and the kohanim and the elders of that city, then they say, proclaim loudly, Yodeinu le'shovches hadom mazeh ve'inenu le'ro. Our hands have not spilled his blood, and our eyes did not see. And then we could say that this unsolved murder has been atoned for. So, my friends, do you hear what's going on over here today? Let's look at what we know of society and civilization at large. What happens when there's a murder? And what does it mean? So first of all, obviously, as a religious Jew, we believe in spiritual, cosmic forces. So when there's an unsolved murder, it's not good. Something's not just in the universe. One life was taken, and justice was not done. And therefore, throughout the whole land, all of Israel feels it. First of all, before we go into this parsha, the Balaturim right away at the beginning, when he starts off over here, he says the justification between this and the previous section of the parsha, where it talks about wars, which says, and the Balaturim says the reason why this follows that is because we're talking about wars, and there's nation against nation. Sometimes there's wars. So therefore you might think that one individual life in your own country might be overlooked at a time of war. Comes along the Torah and places this section right over here to tell us, even when there's wars going on, look what has to happen throughout the whole land, in a certain sense. If one life was lost and we don't know who committed the murder. Okay, that's the first point. So here we see, and the Balaturim also brings out from here, we learn out, you'll see later, I'm not getting into it now, he brings from a verse, but in this section, how Kol Yisrael Arivim Zeh B'zeh. All of Israel are responsible one for the other. Look what's going on over here. And this is actually something which is part of the law, because when the pasuk says over here, V'yotzus keinecha, when the elders go out, what does Rashi say on those words? Miyuchadim shebes keinecha, elu sanhedrin g'dayla. So we have Jerusalem. That's the capital of the country. And we say keinecha means noted ones. So it's brought down that how many of the Sanhedrin Gedela Supreme Court judges, 5 of them, even though there was 70 whatever, but it's the point, the most dignified members of the entire country in Yerushalayim. Imagine there's a murder in New York, which is not even a good analogy because really, but imagine there's a murder in New York and the murder happened somewhere in the Catskills, in a forest. We'll soon get into more details. And the governor or members, the highest politicians, governors or mayors, have to go out into the field and do what he describes over here. So what's the reason for it? One reason for it is, as we see, obviously, as we're trying to bring out, the sanctity of one life, the sanctity of life. Number 2, responsibility. Communal responsibility. Communal guilt. Collective guilt. When something goes wrong, someone has to make a soul searching. Where does that soul searching begin? And the answer is everyone has to take a soul searching, especially the ones of positions of leadership. So we're saying over here, so let's go back to Israel. You're in Yerushalayim, which is the capital, let's say. From Yerushalayim, now you have to travel to the furthest region in Israel. 5 of the Supreme Court judges, and they have to take part in this ritual because there was a body, and it could be he's unidentified, like they will quote in today's language, the secular language, some John Doe was found in a field. And the Supreme Court judges themselves have to travel from Israel, from Yerushalayim to the other end of the country to take part of this ritual. Why? We have to see whose responsibility. Even if it's one life. Okay, and then we go through this ritual. The elders of the local city, the one that's closest, after they determine which city is closest to where the body was found, not Jerusalem, but the city which is closest, the elders of that city have to go out. And then they have to say, and then the Kohanim come out, and then they can make this proclamation, Yadeinu l'shavches adam, hazeh v'einenu le'ro. Over here too, what does Rashi say? Do we actually think that the ones who are the elders of the court, either of the Supreme Court of Yerushalayim or the local ones, are the ones that are actually responsible. They committed the murder. No, over here we see the sequence of events. We didn't know of him, and we didn't let him travel alone without food or without escort. So, if they would have, then they have a degree of responsibility. There was no such a case of a homeless person or someone living in a neighborhood which was not safe. Because if that was the case, so then further down the line, the question is, how can we be a community, a form of governance, and allow these things to be happening? There's no housing. There's poverty. But poverty to the degree that there was no food. These are all things that if you have a healthy society and a responsible society, and you felt responsibility towards the other, it wouldn't be happening. And this is what it means over here, that the leaders have to say, as Rashi says, okay, now let's just repeat some of the things we said. And hello, do I have your attention? So the Supreme Court judges have to go from Yerushalayim and they make a soul searching and to look inside themselves if this was the case as we described just now. And now, let's think for a second. This is the main point now. You know, what's a law? Or a mitzvah? A mitzvah means there's a commandment and there's a chalais. We have straight away a burden. Bar mitzvah. Someone has to do something, he has a commandment, an instruction that he has to fulfill. So now let's look at the contrast of secular law and Jewish law. A murder happens. And it could even include someone who's a John Doe. But that's kolshkein. But it means also someone who we know. But I'm saying even in a case where we don't even know who it is. And where did it happen? It happened in some uncivilized place, a soda. Now what happens? As we know from today's news, in the secular world, what's going to happen? First of all, the only ones that really are responsible, you're going to say, is the police. It's their job. They're meant to protect a city. So what do the police do? The police make an investigation. What's the focus of the investigation? To find the suspect and to chase after leads, etc., etc. But that's it. And let's say they can't find the murder, it's called a cold case, then life goes on, business as usual. Now let's look at the Torah way. It's so unbelievable. On who is the chalais? Who has now a chiyuv? Who has to do something? Whose pain in the neck it is? The Supreme Court Justice, the Zkanim, the Koyanim, all the spiritual leaders, all the people that are in a position of leadership, the good guys, the best and the brightest. Now they have to go from the capital, travel to that field, get involved in this ritual, and do a soul searching to say if they can actually proclaim Yadeinu l'shavchas adam hazeh. Wow, wow, wow. I think this is something you have to think again and again, especially people that are in positions of leadership, teachers, scholars, parents. When there's something that happens that went wrong in a society, we have to ask ourselves immediately the question, how did we come to such a situation? And I have to take a good look at myself. Even though I'm so far removed from murder, murder is not one of my issues. It's not part of my life. Violence. I'm so far removed from that. I pray, I learn, I'm a rabbi, I give sermons. But no, this that happens on the bottom of the chain of humanity, murdering, sniffing the life out of another human being in an act of violence, becomes my problem. As we'll soon bring down, the Rebbe brings in the Sikha, we're going to read, the Rebbe brings the Tana Be'elio, why actually the heads of the Supreme Court, Sanhedrin G'dayla, had to come down. We'll soon see the way the Rebbe brings a quote from Tana Be'elio, because the educators say if we would have educated properly, it wouldn't have happened. And then I saw some commentators over here. Why are the Kohanim coming along? Listen to this. You know why the Kohanim have to come and be part of this ritual and give a blessing? Because their blessing to the Jews is V'yosem lecha shalom. Part of the priestly blessings is to bring peace upon the people. According to some commentators, because they didn't pray hard enough, fervently enough. So therefore the prayer of V'yosem lecha shalom was not really effective enough. And therefore they also have to take part in this ritual to bring an atonement for this unsolved murder. Because if they would have prayed harder, V'yosem lecha shalom, then there would have been greater peace amongst the people. It would be impossible that one should murder another. So look how far this is reaching, our soul searching, our taking account of what's going on. So in other words, this is the key, the contrast of the Torah view on who is the responsibility. Where is the chayv? In other words, until we come to a situation, there's a murder. Okay, a murder happened, and we're talking about one life. And now what has to happen? The leaders from the capital, from Yerushalayim, to the local, and they go through the whole list, measuring which city is the closest. Then the leaders of the closest city and the Kohanim come out, and they do this with the calf. Whatever they do, we'll leave that for another share. And until they make that proclamation, Yodeinu l'shavchas adam hazeh, life can't go on. And part of the commentators bring out the point that because it's going to be such a large to-do ritual when even one life is lost, so therefore that brings out attention, like Crime Stoppers, watch, did you see anything, etc., etc. But obviously imagine a society that this is what happens when one life is lost. Now think about what's going on today in modern society. Every day there's another shooting and killing at McDonald's, at the school, at the bank, at the office, etc., etc., etc. Sometimes we do know the one who committed murder, sometimes not. But the point is, life is cheap. God forbid. And over here we see the total opposite of what means life is cheap. We're talking about one life. And look what has to happen because of that. Etc. Okay, now, I want to read you from the Rebbe's Sikha, Chelik Chav Daled. It's a Shoftim Sikha, and the Rebbe talks about it from page 129 to page 131. So I'm just going to skip a bit from here and there, and he translates it in a spiritual sense. There's a Jew who's having a spiritual descent. We have to take this whole concept and talk about it, about a person who was led astray, who doesn't have the right values, whose Jewishness is being slowly extinguished, even though it can never be extinguished completely. But his Jewishness is becoming dimmed, so to speak. So the Rebbe says, what are we talking about over here? We're talking about a neifel basodeh. And someone could argue, the people that are in responsible positions could say, why is he in a place of a sadeh? A sadeh is a wild place. Today we have neighborhoods, I don't know what the south side in LA is maybe, I don't know, with his gangs in Harlem, or there's tenements. There's terrible, terrible, harsh neighborhoods. And you might say, why was that person in such a place? So you might think, why should I, a respectable person who was brought up properly, I have to go down there to that Sadeh? Sadeh is a place where civilization abandoned that place. And that's what it means in Neufel. Somebody had a great descent. He fell. Again, he's a Sadeh, and he says, the Hepech from Mokim Yishav Adam, it's not a place for civilization. So then you might say, whose fault it is that someone finds himself in such a condition? That person should have been there in the first place. He should have surrounded himself in a Sviv von Torah Midah Shamayim. He should have surrounded himself in a positive environment where they teach Torah. And therefore the Rebbe says, no, everybody has to get involved. And what does it mean that spiritually, that they could say that we didn't see him and we let him go without food and without escort? That means we gave him tzedel derech, what means real food. Torah is compared to food. And what does clothes mean? Shelter. We gave him clothes. The levushim of mitzvahs. They shouldn't be affected by the cold, the coldness and the indifference and the apathy of society, etc., etc. And like I mentioned before, even the Sanhedrin of Yerushalayim, and he brings from the Tanakh, I mentioned this. Hoyalem l'Sanhedrin g'deila shenich Moshe v'Yeshua liksher chavolim shel barzel b'masneim ulagbia b'gdeim l'mayla ma'kavisein v'yachzur b'chol hayoris Yisrael and v'yilmud es Yisrael k'dei sheyiskadel v'yiskadish shmoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'olam es. The Sanhedrin Gedel is guilty because if they really would have taken their responsibility fully, they would have put chains of steel on their necks and lifted up their garments and run throughout the whole land and educated all the people properly, only to be concerned with making Yiskad al v'yiskadash Shmoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But because they failed in that, they have to feel it's their responsibility until they look at it and say that they did do the right thing. And therefore the Rebbe takes a lesson from this, that leaders, especially in the month of Elul, should go around and educate people properly to bring them closer. And I'm taking the lesson for myself. I'll tell you a story. I don't know if I ever said this before. I hope no one's going to get upset from this story. Maybe it's getting a bit gory. But there was one year, I went to a synagogue on Simchas Torah. It was very late at night. And I was thinking, should I go there or not? That place was pretty packed and rowdy, and it's Simchas Torah, people drink l'chaim. But you know what? I decided I'm going to go, not when it's the packed season, high traffic, so to speak. I'll wait a bit later. So I went like 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. Guess what? It was still packed, and I'm navigating my way carefully through the crowd. And mitamol, as I'm there and dancing and I'm navigating, I feel my pants is wet. I look down, and pardon me for all those that are very, very, sensitive to these things. I look down on my pants and I see vomit. As careful as I was not to try to get, and come into contact with something like that, I see my Yontif pants has vomit on my left leg. Anyways, I was so upset. I was completely devastated. Decimated. I'm sitting down, I sat down in this shul and I'm watching everyone dancing and it's Simchas Torah of the Welt. Wow, one of the happiest days of the year. And I'm sitting down and observing all the dancing and I'm feeling inside, upset. I have vomit on my pants. And as I'm sitting over there thinking about the vomit on my pants, affecting my Simchas Torah, I'm thinking to myself, what kind of fool are you? You got your garment is a bit of soil and you're getting upset? What about your spiritual garments? As Chassidus explains, when it comes to a physical garment, all you got to do is take your pair of pants, put it into the washing machine, press a button, presto, it's clean. And you're getting upset about some uncleanliness on your pants? Look how easy this is a solution. But what about your spiritual garments? Your machshava dibur ma'aseh, your thoughts, your actions, and your deeds. It's never so easy to cleanse them and to make a change and to bring a transformation. And did it ever bother me to such a degree that my mood became upset? You know why? Because I spoke lashon hara. I did something. My speech was soiled. Or because of something that went into my mind, I thought negatively about another person. Well, did I get upset about that? For 20 minutes? Or if I did the wrong thing? So that taught me a very powerful lesson. And this is what I'm thinking. We're learning about this parsha, about one unsolved murder. And look at the involvement at the highest levels of leadership. So the sum total of this discussion is, what is the impact of one life? And this is what I have to take to myself, the lesson from this parsha. The impact of my spiritual life. As the Rebbe says in the Sikh over here, every time you do an Aveira, it's a spiritual murder to a certain extent. So look at the level of accountability, responsibility, attention I have to pay when we talk about something spiritual and something being destroyed on a spiritual level, and how we have to bring atonement. And this is the message in the month of Elul, which is a time of soul searching. So they should help. We should all do soul searching on ourselves. Besides what he says over here in the Sikha, that the leadership and teachers and educators have to reach out and educate. And therefore everything that's going on in the community. You know, there's a lot of older people like my age, look, I feel sorry for those people that are having children today. What are they going to do with the future? Stop with your If something's going wrong, the first port of call is the old elders. That you're not doing your job properly. We like to look at this and say, they don't know what they're doing. This generation, there's this, there's that. You're shifting the blame. We're looking at you. And what are you doing about it? The chalais, the chiyuv starts with you. Unbelievable. And also on a personal level. Like I said, physical, spiritual deficiencies, flaws. How serious are we about a spiritual flaw and a stain? So they should help. We should all take these lessons to heart and improve. As we said many times, the biggest room is the room for improvement. And when we will do our part as the service of this month, Ani l'doidi. We have to look at ourselves and make the move. Ani l'doidi, and then v'doidi li. So there will be the v'doidi li, the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish, posting from my home. Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne. Ksiva, Ksimo Teva, Lashana Teva, Mesuka, Good Shabbos.